tu indaghi cinci qua, canta o te qui.
Hello, my name is Ken Frith. Come with me while we inquire into one of the most unusual events of this century. I am standing here alongside beautiful Fraser Lake at Lejac, British Columbia. Before we begin our story, let me show you where Lejac is located. Lejac is located approximately 900 kilometers or 550 miles north of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. It was at Lejac in 1951 that witnesses first told of an incredible event. 4 gravediggers were relocating graves which were too close to a barn. When the gravediggers exhumed the 2-year-old coffin of a native woman named Rose Prince, they found that her body had not decayed. The gravediggers were amazed because inspection of the other coffins revealed all the other bodies had decayed in the normal fashion. Staff from the nearby residential school also viewed the body. They were surprised to find Rose's body perfectly preserved. This incident was not widely known until newspaper reports of her uncorrupted body were published in Canada in 1996 by the Toronto Star, Vancouver Sun, and others. What spurred the newspaper reports were pilgrimages to the gravesite and miraculous cures being associated with dirt from Rose's grave. Could it be that Rose Prince is a saint? If so, it may take the church 50 or 100 years or more for her to make this declaration. In the meantime, let us make our own inquiry into all of these events. We begin our inquiry by traveling to Fraser Lake, located a short 4-minute drive up the highway from Lejac. We go there to interview a miner whose back is said to have been miraculously cured by the use of dirt from Rose's grave. The village of Fraser Lake was in earlier days a fur trading post. Today, mining and forestry are its primary industries. Fraser Lake is a community of approximately 1,000 people. It provides residences for the miners and sawmill employees working in the area. The trees have already turned into their beautiful fall colors. Many of the residences are located along the bluffs overlooking Fraser Lake. It is here that we go to interview miner Nick Loza, who works at the nearby Indaco open pit mine. We have heard that Nick was able to return to work at the mine after his back was miraculously cured by the use of dirt from Rose's grave. We interview him at his house in Fraser Lake.
Well, I saw 3 different doctors. Like 2 of them in Prince George was a neurosurgeon and a bone specialist. He was they said if they operated, the scar tissue was pinched right on to the spine. Once they did this the scan, and it said, it showed that there was lots of scar tissue there, and it was pinching the nerves. And there really was no way to operate and fix it. The only thing they said 90% chance that if they operated, they just cut the spine off or make it worse. Like my legs wouldn't fix it. Maybe take the pain away if you cut the nerves, but it wouldn't make me better. I was off work that time for 3 months when I was off sick here.
And did you ever think you would be able to work again?
I was real optimistic, but I wasn't at the times. I wasn't that sure because I just couldn't get up. Yeah. You can't get up, you can't do nothing.
Nick, tell us what happened when the priest came over to your house.
Like the first time when he came over, he just blessed it, blessed me, and it didn't do nothing. But then, I don't know, it must have been about a week later when he came back. And he had in a little jar, he brought some dirt from the grave, from Rose Prince's grave, and he put holy water in there and mixed it up and made mud. And I was laying here, and he just had me roll over, and he put some of that on my back, and he prayed over it, and still, when I rolled back, I was so sore that I thought I was just screaming. So he just left. He thought he really hurt me. So he just walked away. About an hour later, I fell asleep. Yeah, I mean, this was evening. Must have been about 7 in the evening when he did it, huh? And then about an hour later, I fell asleep, and like I hadn't slept for a long time, not properly. Like I'd fall asleep. You get tired, you fall asleep. But if you just twitch even, the pain down the legs, up the nerves, up the back, was just, couldn't explain it. It's really awful. But, and after he did it, an hour after, I fell asleep and never heard nothing until the next morning. I woke up in the morning and started moving, and usually as soon as I'd move, I'd know the pain would hit as soon as you move. Huh? And this time I moved, nothing, no pain. So I moved a little more, nothing. Put my legs down towards the floor, nothing. Sat up, oh yeah, still. Thought, gee, that's strange. So I figured, well, I wonder what happens if I try to get up. Stood up, nothing, no pain. So I walked over. Well, my legs were really weak. I mean, I haven't been up on them for I don't know how many weeks. Must have been at least 3 weeks since I had been up. And I stood up and walked over to the bathroom. And then she was sleeping in the bedroom because I couldn't go to the bedroom. I was sleeping here in Chesterfield. So I holler at her, look at that, the pain's gone. I'm standing up, I'm walking around.
You must have been pretty shocked by it, Judy.
Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, I was going to send him back to the hospital because, I mean, I wasn't sleeping either. Because, I mean, somebody out here screaming all night. I mean, you don't get any sleep because every time he twitched, he screamed. So I figured I'd send him back to Prince George for, a week so I could get caught up in my sleep. He didn't have to go, and he hasn't been back since.
Mm-hmm. Next, we travel to Burns Lake, located 45 minutes up the highway from Lejac. As we travel to Burns Lake, it occurs to us, if Nick Loza had a miraculous cure, then it would appear that 2 miraculous events have already converged at Lejac. The uncorrupted body of a native carrier lady, and a miraculous healing of a miner by the use of dirt from her grave and the prayers of the local priest. Our destination of Burns Lake has a population of about 2,000 people. It's mainly a service center for mining and forestry operations in the area. We come here to interview retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer Jacques Lacerte. Jacques was one of the first native Indians from the Carrier Nation to join the RCMP. Our investigation indicates that Jacques Lacerte is the last remaining survivor of the gravediggers who exhumed Rose Prince's body. We believe he is one of only 2 people alive today who witnessed the condition of Rose's body when it was exhumed in 1951. We interview him in his house in Burns Lake.
I didn't come to Burns Lake until after I joined the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Jack, were you one of the men that were hired to move Rose Prince's gravesite as well as the other gravesites?
Yes, I was.
And who was with you at the time?
My dad, and my older brother Victor, myself, and one other person. Can't recall his name. When we opened Rose Prince's coffin, it was like a vacuum, and so when they opened it up, it made a noise like air was rushing in, and when we opened it up, we found her to be like she was asleep, and it was really, to me at the time, it was like scary, because you accustomed yourself to be ready for a decayed body, and then I remember my father And this other man were astounded, like, wow. And so they sent, I think they sent my older brother Victor down to the school to bring it to the priests and nuns' attention that Rose's grave had been exhumed, and there was absolutely no decay. And her hair, normally when one passes away, their hair continues to grow in their fingernails, and hers did not. Her hair was done, like, she looked very nice, and also, like, her skin texture seemed like it was warm and alive, and her nails were not long, hadn't grown long, they were just had, as she passed on. So, I don't know, it was really, really very different, unusual. But the unusual was stirring, so to speak. Stirring in your soul at why this phenomena happened. Why is it? Why is she like this when all the others have rotted away? And I looked on her as being, even at that time, like, hey, this woman must be very special, that she's not decayed. Like, the Lord has certainly chose her for whatever reason to not have her body be decayed like all the others were.
Having completed our interview with the last surviving gravedigger, we now return to Le Jacques to view the original gravesite with former carrier chief George, who still resides at Le Jacques. Were you a carrier chief?
Yes, I was a counselor for some years before I became a chief. In 1979 I became a chief until 1986. My people retired me then.
George, would you be able to tell me the origins of the word carrier?
What I'm doing is that years ago, when a man died, they used to burn, or anybody died, they used to burn their remains. They used to burn their remains, and what didn't burn, I heard if a man was married, the woman carried these remains on her back for a year after his death. That's where the word carrier came from. Now, as you walk through here, you'll see, you'll find some indentations, which is probably the old graves that were dug up and then filled in. If you walk around here, you'll run into some of the holes. See, like here. The graveyard, as I remember it, was probably 75 feet by 100 feet or so. There used to be a road down through here. And the graveyard used to be around here.
George, would you be able to point where Rose Prince's grave was reburied?
From here, you can see the little square building down just almost over the satellite dishes.
Okay.
You see that there's
The
a
blue
little
one.
shack there. There's a little grey shack,
Mm-hmm.
and just other side that maybe 150 feet is where they relocated they reburied the remains of the people that were dug up around here from here. And when I went to school here in 1943, she was already, she stayed here and she worked as a seamstress and sometimes as a, like substitute teacher. I guess she done all kinds of things, probably cooked too. She was a very small lady. She was deformed. Her spine was deformed. In 1949, 48, when I remember her, she was very tiny. Well, I was in 1949. I was 15 years old. Even at that time, I used to look at her downway. I mean, she was so tiny because of her deformity, I guess.
Do you think of Rose as being a saint?
I believe so. Yes, she was she never left school. She always was here, even during the summer. When all the children went home for the summer holidays, she always stayed here.
Next, we travel to North Vancouver, to the convent of the Sisters of the Child Jesus, to interview two of the sisters who knew Rose at Lejac. Vancouver is about a 10-hour drive south of Lejac. It is Canada's primary port on the west coast. Many people say it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. As we travel through the city, we pass through Stanley Park. Across the harbor, we view from Stanley Park our destination of North Vancouver. We cross over the harbor to the convent via the Lionsgate Bridge. Recently, the sisters reenacted their arrival 100 years ago on the shores of North Vancouver to establish schools for the natives living in the area. Today, the sisters operate an elementary school at the convent to service both natives and non-natives. First, we interview Sister Eleanor Cluza, the last living nun of the nuns who witnessed the condition of Rose Prince's body when it was exhumed in 1951. Our interview with Sister Cluza takes place in the convent chapel. Jacques Lacerte said that after the coffin was exhumed, it was then closed and brought up to the school for viewing. Sister, tell us your involvement.
In the morning, they were bringing her up, and they stopped at the kitchen and asked if anyone wants to see Rose Prince. We're going to open the coffin. And I said, I like to go with another sister. And we went up. And I was so surprised. I was really shocked because she was so lovely looking and smiling and not a spot on her face.
The next day, what was the talk around the school about the uncorrupted body of Rose?
That she's a saint, that's all. That she's a saint.
Rose graduated at Lejac before I got there, and she went home for the holidays, and she found a change on the reserve because her mother had passed away, and she did not, her new stepmother did not take to her. So when September came, she told her father, she wanted to go back to La Jac where she felt more at home. And then she stayed on at La Jac till she died. She was a person that the other children in the school looked up to. She had that respect from everyone, even though some of the smaller ones didn't know her. There was something different about her than a usual person.
Was Rose a saint?
Yes, for me she was, yeah. She was really a lovely person. She'd smile at you and say, I prayed for you. Yeah.
She was a very holy person. When she wasn't working or going for a walk with me, we'd find her in the chapel. And she used to attend daily Mass, and she prayed a lot, especially the Rosary.
I hope we'll see her one day canonized, but it will take a long time, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I might die, meet her in heaven before, before all this.
Next, we travel to the native reserve and village of Notley, located about a 15-minute drive down the highway from Le Jac on Fraser Lake. Notley has a population of about 300 native people. We go there to interview two of Rose's childhood friends. Our first interview will be with Chief George's sister, Elder Bernie McCory.
My late husband was a white man, and he had been adopted into the Bear clan, and his name was Polar Bear. They call him Polar Bear because he's white. We went up in the mountains, and these very strange things happened, you know. That day, we went to the highest place we could go, and we saw 5 bears. That one bear, big bear, holy cow. It'd sit down and it'd look at us, you know. And I said to Ralph, I said, what's happening? You know, we'll see a bear now and then, you know, here and there, you know, we hear them. But this time they all came out. But that night, Ralph, he wouldn't leave the bush, you know. And he told me, oh, I love this mountain. That grizzly bear, it roared at us. It roared at us. And I tell Ralph, you hear that? He said, oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. Finally, I got him back. That's the last time we were on the mountain. And then, you know, a couple of days later, he went back up there and he dropped dead he died on the mountain. I never tell people this.
You mentioned that you instruct. Are you a teacher? Do you teach in school?
I teach teachers how to teach.
What exactly do you teach?
Career, language and culture, and then English too, because you cannot teach language in just one language.
Can you tell me anything about Rose?
Well, she was my best friend. Very humble. Very humble. But also, by the same token, she had a nice sense of humor. You know, in Le Jac they had these benches, you know, we had benches. We didn't have chairs. We just have well, anyway, Rose, you know, little girl, she was putting on changing her shoes, you know, she's sitting on the floor, little girl, you know, maybe 9 or 10 years old. This is what my sister told me. And somebody grabbed the end of that long bench about from here to over there, you know. And just hit Rose behind the back. And after that, Rose was very ill. They sent her home and things like that. And then when she came back, that's when she had that hunchback. Apparently, her back was broken. They broke her back with that bench. My sister remembers that. She told me about that.
Did Rose have pain from her back?
Yes, I think so.
Did she complain a lot about her pain?
Never. Rose never complained.
What do you think about all the attention surrounding her?
I don't know. I never think, I never give it a thought. I never give it a thought, but like my daughter, you know, she almost died last week. And then I said, Rose, my friend, help me. Help me. And then they rushed her to Prince George, and then her bleeding stopped. You know, that's the only time I have ever appealed to her in any way. You know, she's my friend, you know. I talk to her every day, like, you know. Every day, you know. When I'm not well or anything, I sit up and, you know, I always say my morning and night prayers and so on. But in the morning, you know, when I need help, I say, Rose, help me. Just look after me.
That same day, we cross over to the other side of the reserve to interview Elder Margaret Newski on a park bench alongside what the local museum says is the shortest river in the world, the Notley River. Notley means annual run of the salmon. Margaret Newski knew Rose from her childhood days.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Rose is actually from Fort St. James, and I'm from Fort St. James too. And she went to school, and I went to school. I went to school with her. And when she was in school, she was really a quiet girl, nice, quiet, sensitive. And her work that she does was fantastic. She used to do some work, crocheting, embroidering, painting, oil painting, and she used to make the habits for the priests, for the church. She was really holy person. She prayed a lot. I think Rose was very special to all the sisters and the priests. She was always in church. When she hasn't got time to do anything, she goes to church and prays.
Having completed our inquiry of two elders who grew up with Rose, we now plan to inquire of some of Rose's surviving relatives. Our first destination is Rose's birthplace, the city of Fort St. James, located in northern British Columbia. Traveling to Fort St. James gives us the opportunity to not only interview a relative, but examine the society into which Rose was born. Today, our journey to Fort St. James will take only about 70 minutes, although at the time of Rose's birth in 1915, it was a 2-day journey. Fort St. James was founded in 1806 by explorer Simon Fraser. The historic town of Fort St. James is one of the oldest in northern British Columbia. It was here, on the shore of Stewart Lake, the Hudson's Bay Company established their fort. Supplies for servicing the fur trade were received by boat and unloaded at the wharf. Supplies were also brought in by animal pack trains, which traveled right into the fort, where their supplies were unloaded and brought into the warehouse. Then the pack trains were reloaded with furs for the return journey. As a child growing up in Fort St. James, Rose would have seen her people gathering berries and fishing for salmon with the aid of fish weirs cleverly constructed at strategic locations in the river. Also, they used salmon traps that allowed the fish to enter but not escape. And she would have seen the men hunting whenever game was abundant, and acting as guides to those less skilled in the art of hunting. Although at the time of her childhood, Rose's people were living in above-ground wooden plank houses, she could have still explored the remains of the traditional carrier pit houses, built below ground, covered with poles, branches, and dirt, and with a notched log providing entrance through the roof. In the mid-1800s, a permanent mission and church was established in Fort St. James by Father Jean-Marie Lejac, the person after whom Lejac was later named. Rose was born into a family of 9 children. Her father, Jean-Marie, came from a long line of carrier chiefs. He was also known as the church chief and carried out various duties at the church in accordance with his title. Today, the population of Fort St. James is about 2,000 people, and forestry is its primary industry. Fort St. James has a rich heritage of native peoples, explorers, fur traders, and Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Fort St. James National Historic Site has been established, preserving the Hudson's Bay trading post that served the trappers and fur traders at the time of Rose's birth in 1915. The fort has been restored to its early days. It offers visitors a fascinating glimpse into the history of Canada's fur trade industry. Visitors explore the fully restored buildings such as the warehouse, the fish cache building, where the fish were stored for the winter season, and the trading store. During July and August, staff are dressed in period costume to help visitors see the fort as it was in earlier times. But today, we come to interview a next of kin of Rose, first cousin E. Valley Murdoch.
But she was a little bit older than me, and she was a kindness and gentle and patient, and anytime we had a problem, I used to go to her, and she used to talk to me, give me advice. She was such a wonderful person. I often think of her.
Do you pray to her often?
Not every day, but whenever especially my children, they're all grown up, and all of them, they became alcoholics. And my husband too, who is an alcoholic, and I always ask her to pray so that they can come back to the church, turn their lives around, and there's 2 of them now are staying sober, and 1 of them has come back to the church. I don't pray to her, but I ask her to pray for me. Like some people, they say that you just have to pray to God, and then but I ask her to pray for me through her intercession, then we receive graces.
We continue our inquiry in early winter by traveling to Sardis, British Columbia. We go there to interview another relative of Rose's that various people have recommended we talk to. Her name is Mary O'Connell. Sardis is about a 9-hour drive south of Lejac. It is a farming community on the outskirts of Vancouver. We come to interview Mary O'Connell in her home. Mary works as a seamstress at the nearby Canadian Armed Forces base. Are you related to Rose?
She was my cousin. She was my first cousin.
What do you remember of her? What do you remember best? Do you remember any characteristics about her?
I think her kindness. She was gentle.
and you could go to her with your problems.
Do you know whether she was in pain?
She didn't complain if she was. She never complained. I've never heard her complain, whether she had a headache or backache or whatever.
What do you know about the uncorrupted body of Rose?
To me, it's like a miracle. At first, when I heard about it, I thought, oh yeah, sure. But and then you heard it from different people who were there. The Lacerts, the older Lacert, and then you heard about it from the younger one, Jack Lacert, I think.
Was Rose a saint?
Was she a saint? She was a saint. So she is a saint. She had the patience of a saint, the understanding.
Next, our inquiry leads us to the city of Vanderhoof. Vanderhoof is located about a 40-minute drive down the highway from Lejac. Vanderhoof is a community of about 4,000 people. It was from here Rose boarded the train at age 7 to travel to Lejac to commence her schooling. Little did she know that she would return to Vanderhoof at age 35, as it was here at the hospital in Vanderhoof that Rose spent her final hours on Earth. We interview Rose Pierre, the head of the Native Yinka Dene Language Institute, inside the former hospital, which has now been converted into classrooms for the College of New Caledonia.
This was the original hospital where Rose Prince was brought when she became ill. In here, this is a classroom now. See, the College of New Caledonia uses it for a classroom. But back here used to be the infirmary. There was a wall that divided this little room. And her bed was, I guess, underneath the window. One of the elders that sat in here told us, she said, I don't know why I feel so peaceful and happy in this room. And about the 3rd or 4th day of a training session, all of a sudden she remembered, she says, this is where Rose Prince died. She said, this used to be the infirmary because this is the end of the wall. And she said there was a wall that divided and her bed was right in the corner here. And on the day that she died, the priest was celebrating a mass for her downstairs in the chapel. And the priest had gone to Fort St. James to let people know that she was dying and could some of her relatives be with her. So her 2 brothers and other cousins came. And the elder that was here said she was one of them. And the priest celebrating mass downstairs, they decided to keep all of the doors open here down into the chapel. And her brother, one of her brothers, was standing at the top of the stairs here. And her second brother, I guess, was standing on the bottom of the steps here. And he was telling him what part of the mass was being said, and the brother up here relayed to her what part of the mass it was. And she was able to receive communion on that day before she died. There used to be a door here leading into the little chapel in there. And the rest of the people were out here listening to the mass, and they said that she died just shortly after her communion. After the priest was able to give her communion. So that used to be the chapel. It's turned into an office now.
Having concluded our interview, we take notice of the unusual circumstance that a special mass was said for Rose as she was dying. That relatives and friends traveled from a distance to be with her. That she died right after receiving communion. All this for a quiet, humble girl with a deformed back. We return to Fraser Lake to interview Father Vince James, the present parish priest of St. Andrew's at Fraser Lake.
I came here to Fraser Lake about 2 years ago, and I had heard of her before that a little bit, but not very much. And then they did an article on Rose Prince, the Vancouver BC Catholic. It's a newspaper in Vancouver. And in there they interviewed the Sisters of the Child Jesus, and I think it's Sister Helen Cluza or something. Eleanor Cluza. She spoke about being here and witnessing the coffin when it had opened and so forth on that day back in 1951. And that touched me. I thought, wow, you know, that's really something. And Sister has nothing to gain by making a big story up or whatever, but I could just tell just by reading it that this was sincere and honest. They really and truthfully experienced this. And so it helped convince me in my heart that this was something to work for and do my best that I can do while I'm here as a priest till my time. Do everything I can to make this pilgrimage go well and so forth.
Have you been getting any letters or phone calls?
I would get a fair amount of phone calls because in that write-up on the Vancouver Sun and so forth, it mentioned where Mr. Loza had been healed and through his prayers and that some of the earth from Rosa's grave had been used to put on his back or so forth, and then they prayed. And so people, when they read that, naturally called up and were very interested in if I would send them some of this earth or so forth. So I thought, fine, you know, if God can do anything he wants, I have no problem with that. So I said I would send the earth. Now, one lady called me up from Vancouver and mentioned where she had a cancer and so forth and going through a tough time, and would I be kind enough to send her this earth? So I did. And so she called me up maybe a few weeks later and said where she had been hemorrhaging a lot of bleeding and stuff, and she had applied this to her, and she said that it just stopped. The bleeding stopped. Not that she was cured from cancer. She's still struggling with that. And then another lady, a native lady who had came up from the Nicola Valley, who attended the gathering, I knew her when I worked there, had a real back problem. She was always in pain in her back, she would tell me. And one day I was talking to her since she left, and she says, you know, Father, that pain is gone since I left LeJac. I don't have that pain no more in my back. I presume that this year coming, 1997, we will have many more people coming and so forth. And so I'll just put it in the hands of God, and I do my best while I'm here. You know, and if God works, and I'm sure he does, at the pilgrimage and with the people, then I say, God bless.
So, in order to complete our inquiry, we returned to LeJac in 1997 to observe what takes place over the annual 3-day pilgrimage. We saw people from various walks of life arriving from distant places. The program listed Mass each day, talks, prayers, and gatherings. The Saturday evening Mass was followed by a healing service. At the healing service, where Rose's intercession for healing was sought, people moved forward in 3 separate lines, each person seeking a physical or spiritual healing. One person got up from a wheelchair and walked. Others were seeking something less dramatic. All appeared to believe the long wait worthwhile. Over the 3 days of the pilgrimage, people pray in a teepee in front of the Blessed Sacrament. On Sunday, the bishop arrived early and agreed to give us an interview. What steps have to be taken for Rose to be officially declared a saint?
Well, actually, it's quite a long process that's involved in the eventual canonization of an individual. A person is usually declared, first of all, venerable, and that means that they are recognized for their virtue, for their way of life, their exemplary way of life, so that the Christian community could follow them. So after they're declared venerable, then there is a rather serious and prolonged investigation that takes place, further into the virtues of the individual's life. And there are required a couple of miracles, confirmed miracles, indicating that these events have been caused through the intercession of this particular individual. And after that, another process of investigation and 2 more miracles before the individual can be declared a saint by the church.
Bishop Wiesner, do you think Rose will one day be declared a saint?
I think there's a very good possibility. I think it's important that we go about this slowly and prudently. What I find to be very important is that the local people, the people themselves, recognize her virtue more, have more devotion to her, give more attention to her, try to have her virtues exemplified in their lives, and that they, in a sense, rally around Rose more. I would like to see that happen more than, say, we coming from the outside and imposing this on them. So I think we need to encourage that and invite her own people to promote her cause more, to become more involved in the furthering of that cause.
How are you related to Rose?
Rose is our aunt. That's my dad's sister. Her father was Paul Prince.
And I only know my Aunt Rose through when she was, her body was, or the grave had been moved, and my dad told us about it. She enjoyed the surroundings around her, and she was a beautiful artist. She painted mainly flowers, and she did very personal work for people that were close to her or friends, you know. And I have a piece of her artwork here, a card that was given to Sister Marianne, and that was given to me because she said it's served this purpose for her, and she says this would be more meaningful for you to have it, and I give you this. And I was very grateful. And like I say, the peace that she had, the serenity within her. Whenever children had problems, they always came to her, and she had always calmed them and said, rather than curse them or hate them, just pray for them.
How can I explain it? I can't explain it, but I was touched. I really was.
Did you know anything about Rose prior to this pilgrimage?
Yeah, she was my mother's cousin.
What do you think about gathering with many other people that have the same ideas about her?
How do you mean?
Do you feel it's special?
Yeah, it's special, especially for the Native people. We have something in common. You know, we have someone that we can maybe forge toward being like. You know, because among the Native people, there's a lot of alcohol, there's a lot of drugs, there's broken homes, there's what is there? There's so much wrong with our Native peoples right now, and a lot of people have turned their back on the church, turned their back on God, so to speak. And with a pilgrimage like this, with Rose Prince in the background, it's drawing more and more people back.
Onde se vai Just get on me, I'm up one west and the jet, then the day. No qui a quanto tempo, e schminko ja. Do quando I början mojan ci wita man, e den de man jam, nen de man de weta de jam. Uci munja sit man, the damn time. No qui a quattro te e te